Outside of the big three of Real Madrid, Barcelona and Atletico Madrid, whose financial might towers above every other La Liga team, Sevilla have been the best of the rest in Spanish football over the last 15 years. In fact, speaking purely in terms of trophies during that time, Sevilla have won as many as Atletico Madrid. The poster child in Spain as to how a club of modest means should be run, in order to punch above their weight and occasionally knock the big boys off their perch, while Sevilla's quest to win a first La Liga title since 1946 still goes on, they have made the Europa League their own. Between 2006 and 2020, the club from Andalusia won UEFA's second biggest club competition, a record-breaking 6 times. The previous record, which was held jointly by Juventus, Liverpool and Inter Milan, was just 3 UEFA Cup or Europa League crowns in the history of the half-century-old competition. Sevilla doubled that, all in the space of just 14 years, winning every Europa League final that they have contested. During that time, the likes of Dani Alves, Sergio Ramos and Ivan Rakitic have all donned the famous red and white shirt of the Palanganas, and it has been 20 years since the club last finished outside of the top half of the La Liga table, and a decade since they last failed to qualify for Europe. And yet, almost halfway through the current campaign, Sevilla, who began this season in the Champions League and as the 4th favourites to win the La Liga title, are currently 17th in La Liga, tied on points with Cadiz in the relegation zone and in genuine danger, some supporters fear, of losing their La Liga status. Julen Lopetegui, Sevilla's manager for the last 3 seasons, lost his job in October and has since taken over at Wolverhampton Wanderers. But his replacement, Jorge Sampaoli, who previously managed Sevilla in the 2016-17 season, has so far been unable to turn the club's fortunes around. And now questions are starting to be asked of Sevilla's president and sporting director. It is a crisis that would have seemed unthinkable not only 2.5 years ago, when Sevilla won their last Europa League title in some style, but even just 5 months ago, following a 4th place finish in La Liga last season. So how has it been allowed to happen? Just who's to blame? And can the club turn it around? Well, that's what this video is all about, so sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to the southwest of Spain, to a city of conquest and kingdoms, where the sun shines, bitter oranges grow, Christopher Columbus was finally buried, and where 2 football clubs, who have been battling for supremacy for more than 100 years, are currently enjoying very contrasting seasons. Sevilla and Real Betis, the 2 titans of Andalusian football, who enjoy enormous support and have a fervent rivalry, are not historic powerhouses of the Spanish game. Before the turn of the millennium, they had won a combined total of just 6 major trophies in more than 200 years of history between them. And in the year 2000, neither side got off to a great start to the new millennium, as both were relegated from La Liga alongside Atletico Madrid in what looks like an extraordinary league table less than 23 years on. It was a second relegation in just 4 seasons for Sevilla, who were suffering under the weight of crippling debts, having been a really competitive La Liga side during the early to mid-1990s. It was clear that radical change was required, and behind the scenes, former Sevilla goalkeeper Monchi felt that he had the solution to resurrect the club that was closest to his heart. Appointed as Sevilla's new director of football, Monchi was very young to inherit such a role, aged only 31, having retired voluntarily from football at the end of the previous season. Part of the Sevilla team that had enjoyed success in the 90s, spearheaded by future Ballon d'Or runner-up Davor Schuker, and the Sevilla team that was relegated in 1997 before bouncing back in 1999, Monchi had retired from football voluntarily following that promotion, despite the fact that he was only 30 years old. A one-club man, Monchi came through the youth ranks at Sevilla, but he played almost half as many games for the club's B team as he ever did in the first team. In total, Monchi only ever played 85 league games for Sevilla, over the course of 9 seasons in the first team, spending 7 of those seasons as Juan Carlos Unze's number 2. Whilst Monchi's playing days might have been modest, his ambitions as Sevilla's director of football were anything but. He wanted to turn the club's youth department into one of the best in Spain, attract talented but unknown young players to the club, and build a long-term project void of the precarity that had plagued his own time playing for Sevilla. In 2002, Sevilla also elected a new club president who appeared to share his vision, or one who was at least convinced that Monchi was capable of achieving it. In 1995, Sevilla had suffered an administrative crisis that almost saw them kicked out of Spain's professional football leagues, that is to say, the top 2 divisions, and club president Luis Cuervas had a target on his back from that point on. Jose Maria del Nido stepped in as interim president, helping to secure Sevilla's league status, but still the rest of the decade was extremely turbulent. Del Nido, whose father previously served as Sevilla's vice president, was elected as club president in 2002, with a mandate of reducing the club's €40 million debt whilst remaining competitive on the pitch. Monchi's strategy of developing both homegrown and cheap, unknown imported players would be key to Del Nido's success, since those players would not only carry Sevilla up the La Liga table, they could then be sold for significant fees to help pay down the club's debt. Monchi created a network of more than 700 scouts worldwide, in addition to radical reform at home, and it worked a treat. The late Jose Antonio Reyes was the regime's first major success story, a product of their own youth ranks, who became a starman at Sevilla and broke into the Spanish national team before being sold to Arsenal for £17 million. That was a hefty transfer fee at the time, accounting for more than half of Sevilla's debt, and there would be plenty more to follow. From Sevilla's own youth ranks alone, Diego Capel played almost 200 games for the club before being sold to Sporting Club de Portugal. Jesus Navas is now Sevilla's all-time record appearance holder, in addition to having fetched £15 million when he joined Manchester City, before returning to Sevilla on a free transfer. Alberto Moreno was snapped up for a fee of £12 million by Liverpool, and Sergio Ramos had basically spent just a single season in the Sevilla first team before Real Madrid paid €27 million to acquire his services, making Ramos the most expensive Spanish teenager and defender of all time in 2005. Speaking in purely financial terms at least, Sevilla's external recruitment and development was even more impressive. Julio Baptista was signed for just £1.75 million. He scored 47 goals in only 79 games for Sevilla, and was sold for £16.9 million to Real Madrid. Dani Alves was brought in from Brazil for roughly €1 million, had 5 sensational seasons at the club, and was sold to Barcelona for £30 million. Seydou Keita and Ivan Rakitic were both also signed for very modest fees, before being sold on to Barcelona for much more substantial ones, and Alvaro Negredo scored 85 goals in 182 games at the Estadio Ramon Sanchez Pizjuan, before being sold on to Manchester City for a €10 million profit. During Monchi's first reign at Sevilla, from the year 2000 to 2017, Sevilla turned a profit of more than €200 million in the transfer market, whilst going from the Segunda Division and being a side with a reputation for being a crisis club to top 6 regulars in La Liga, qualifying for the Champions League on multiple occasions, winning the Copa del Rey twice, and winning 5 UEFA Cup or Europa League crowns. It was an absolutely extraordinary transformation. Jose Maria del Nido stepped down as Sevilla president in 2013 amidst a corruption scandal which saw him sent to prison for 7.5 years. Del Nido's father was the regional leader of Fuerza Nueva, which translates as New Force, a far-right post-Francoist political party that became notorious in Spain during the transition to democracy. New Force members carried out and were involved in a whole host of terrorist attacks, targeting trade unionists, striking workers, and left-wing politicians. but the party enjoyed little electoral success. Del Nido, a lawyer and businessman by trade, joined his father's branch of New Force in his early years, and he offered up his legal services to work as the lawyer for FN Colonel Carlos Del Mir when he stood trial for planning a far-right coup in Spain, funded by the Libyan dictator Colonel Gaddafi. Del Nido also worked as a lawyer for the municipal government of the affluent resort city of Marbella, under mayors Jesus Hill, who presided for 16 years as Atletico Madrid president and was himself a far-right politician, and his successor, Julian Munoz, who was also part of Hill's party, which was rather helpfully named Hill. First charged in 2006 for €6.7 million in payments that he had received from City Hall, Del Nido was convicted in 2011 and finally jailed in 2013 following an unsuccessful appeal against the initial judgment. Del Nido was replaced as Sevilla president by Jose Castro Carmona, who had been the club's vice president since 1999, preceding Del Nido's election in 2002, and on the surface level at least, very little changed. Carmona continued to allow Monchi to go out and do his thing, and following consecutive 9th-placed finishes, which were viewed as a disappointment following 6 successive top-5 finishes, Sevilla looked to be heading in the right direction again, following the appointment of former Valencia boss Unai Emery, and so it proved. Over the next 3 seasons in which Emery was in charge, quite remarkably, Sevilla won 3 successive Europa League titles, beating Benfica, Dnipro, and Liverpool in those 3 finals. In the summer of 2016, though, Sevilla were rocked by the news not only that Unai Emery wanted to leave the club, having been offered the PSG job, but also that sporting director Monchi, after 16 years in the hot seat, wanted to take a step back and leave the club. Despite all that he had done for Sevilla, the club refused, demanding that he cough up his €5 million buyout clause if he didn't want to see out the terms of his contract. So Emery was replaced by Jorge Sampaoli, who came in fresh off the back of winning the Copa America with Chile, and therefore with a big reputation, and Monchi stuck around, though only through until the end of the season, when he did finally leave Sevilla, taking up a similar role in Italy with Roma. Monchi's departure undoubtedly changed things, how could it not, but those changes weren't immediately obvious. To add to the general sense of churn, Jorge Sampaoli took the Argentina job at the end of the season, after less than 11 months at Sevilla, and the club went through 3 different managers in the 2017-18 season. In the summer of 2018, Sevilla had to carry out an enforced overhaul following the sale of key players like Clement Lenglet, Steven Nzonzi, and Luis Muriel. Their replacements, which seemed to be scattergun and not exactly of the profile that Sevilla had tended to target over the past couple of decades, was the surest sign yet that things had changed without Monchi. Once again, Sevilla's manager, Pablo Machin this time, failed to see out the entire season. The 2017-18 and 2018-19 seasons were chaotic for Sevilla, but they still managed to record 7th and 6th place finishes over their 2 campaigns. That was largely thanks to Wissam Ben Yedder, who scored 52 goals across those 2 seasons, masking over a lot of Sevilla's weaknesses, along with the fact that several other La Liga sides were also experiencing similar tumult and were therefore unable to capitalise on Sevilla's mishaps. In the 2017-18 season, for example, Sevilla scored 49 goals in 38 La Liga games and conceded 58, giving them an overall goal difference of -9. That was a worse goal difference than Athletic Club, who finished 16th that season, yet Sevilla somehow ground out enough wins to qualify for the Europa League. Nonetheless, whatever their league position might have said, Sevilla finished the season closer on points to the relegation zone than they did to the league title, leaving no one in any doubt as to the club's direction of travel. During this time, Sevilla's old friend Monchi wasn't actually getting on all that much better himself over at AS Roma. The fact that his first task as sporting director was to confirm to supporters that club legend Francesco Totti would be retiring at the end of the season is what you might call a tough start, But in the 2017-18 season, Roma actually had a decent campaign, finishing third in Serie A, down from second the previous season, and reaching the semi-finals of the Champions League for the first time since 1984, when it was still called the European Cup. Over the summer of 2018 though, Monchi was given funds that he'd never previously had at his disposal. Alisson, Radja Nainggolan, and Kevin Strootman all departed for considerable fees, in a summer that saw Roma raise €150 million in player sales, but spend €164 million on their replacements. To cut a long story short, Monchi's recruitment that summer wasn't very good. Javier Pastore, brought in for €24.7 million from PSG, continued to be plagued by injuries. Steven Nzonzi, who had been such a big success story for Monchi at Sevilla, never really fit in following his €26.65 million arrival, and club record signing Patrick Schick, who set Roma back €42 million, scored just 3 goals in 24 Serie A games the following season, as Roma slumped to a 6th place finish. In March 2019, both manager Eusebio Di Francesco and Monchi left Roma, and it was confirmed that Monchi would be returning to Sevilla. Monchi's return was complemented by the appointment of former Real Madrid and Spain boss Julian Lopetegui, a calming figure, and the two of them seemed to bring some welcome stability back to Sevilla. Sevilla finished 4th in all 3 of Lopetegui's seasons in charge at the club, from 2019-20 up to last season, despite the sale of starman Wissam Ben Yedder during his first summer in charge, and in his debut campaign, the club won a 6th Europa League title. On the transfer front, throughout this period it should be said, the money kept rolling in. €36 million for Lenglet, €40 million for Ben Yedder, €21 million for Muriel, but Sevilla also spent a fortune in the 2019-20 season on some gems like Jules Koundé and Diego Carlos, but also on some costly duds such as Ronnie Lopez and Javier Hernandez. Nonetheless, Lopetegui turned Sevilla into a really well-oiled machine. They weren't the most exhilarating side to watch, and they didn't score all that many goals, but their defence was superb, and everyone knew their roles to a T. Lopetegui was pragmatic in how he approached games, and Sevilla developed a reputation for winning, or at least drawing, games against the Big Three. In the 2021-22 season, with Barcelona in chaos, Atletico Madrid on a come-down after winning the league title, and Real Madrid having lost their 2 starting centre-backs, Sergio Ramos and Rafael Varane, some began to believe that Sevilla could actually be outsiders to win the league title, and it was a billing that they lived up to for most of the campaign. Of their first 29 La Liga games, taking us all the way through to April and the season's home straight, Sevilla lost just 2 of them, in a run of form, which saw them breathing down the neck of Real Madrid with just 9 games to go. One problem that plagued Sevilla, particularly during the second half of the season, despite their outstanding form, was a failure to turn draws into wins against so-called lesser opponents. But a far bigger problem was the way in which they collapsed when it mattered most. Sevilla won just 3 of those last 9 games, which included defeats to both Barcelona and Real Madrid, ultimately not only missing out on the La Liga title by a whopping 16 points, but also actually dropping behind both Barcelona and Atletico Madrid right at the end of the season. It was still another 4th place finish, hardly a disgrace, but it felt like a failure given the way in which the season had finished. Over the summer, more players left, Sevilla's outstanding centre-back Jules Koundé and Diego Carlos raking in more than €18 million between them as they headed to Barcelona and Aston Villa. It was an anticipated but nonetheless shattering blow to Sevilla, and replacing them would be a task seemingly too great even for Monchi. Some lackluster transfer business in recent years had seen the Sevilla squad become bloated, with a handful of older players on inflated salaries who Monchi was finding it difficult to offload. Without shifting them from the club's wage bill, which the club couldn't do, Monchi's hands were effectively tied behind his back. As such, of the more than €90 million generated in player sales last summer, only €28 million was reinvested in new arrivals. Young centre-back Tanguy Nianzou arrived for a fee of €16 million from Bayern Munich, but he is only 20 years old, and he had played just 28 games of first-team football up to that point. Nianzou may well develop into an outstanding centre-back. Sevilla certainly have form on that front, but Sevilla have been forced to throw him straight in at the deep end given their lack of options, where he has found it a bit of a baptism of fire. That's partly because fellow centre-back Marcao, who was Sevilla's only other summer signing to arrive for a fee, €12 million from Galatasaray in his case, was injured when he arrived in Andalusia, and he has been injured for pretty much the entirety of the time since. Recovering from a hamstring injury initially, Marcao played 4 La Liga games for Sevilla before rupturing his thigh muscle at the beginning of November, an injury which has sidelined him ever since. Other signings were made, 4 of them to be precise, 2 on free transfers and 2 on loan, but particularly the free transfers seem to sum up the reasons for Sevilla's recent decline. Adnan Januzaj arrived after his contract came to an end at Real Sociedad. Meanwhile, Isco was the most high-profile arrival. The former Golden Boy Award winner signed following 9 years at Real Madrid, reportedly upon the insistence of Julian Lopetegui, who had managed Isco at both Spain and Real Madrid, despite initial reluctance and opposition from Monchi. There can be no doubt that Isco is a wonderfully gifted footballer who would be an asset to any club at his best, but he hasn't been at anything like his best for the best part of a decade. This was a club that for so long had been renowned for unearthing hidden gems for bargain basement fees, if they cost anything at all, signing a 30-year-old, presumably on massive wages, who no one else seemed to want. See also Eric Lamela and the return of Ivan Rakitic. Players of real pedigree, but not the types of signings that we would have expected of Sevilla until recently. Sevilla's poor form and low morale from the end of the 2021-22 season continued at the beginning of this season, with failure to win any of their opening 4 La Liga games and defeating 3 of them, heralding Sevilla's worst start to a La Liga season in 41 years. At the start of October, having won just 1 of their opening 10 games in all competitions, and off the back of a humiliating defeat at home to Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League, Julian Lopetegui lost his job. He was replaced by Jorge Sampaoli, to the surprise of some people, given that Sevilla were widely reported to have been irritated when he left the club after just a single season to take charge of Argentina 5 years ago. Sampaoli is a more chaotic figure than Lopetegui, equally pragmatic in his approach but a little bit more attacking, and it was felt that his energy and enthusiasm might be able to breathe some new life into what felt like a pretty lifeless club. Despite his contrasting personality, little has changed on the pitch under Sampaoli. Above all else, Sevilla still can't seem to stop conceding goals. The loss of Koundé and Carlos has been enormous, and from the tightest backline in La Liga last season, when they conceded just 30 goals all season, Sevilla now have one of the leakiest defences in the league, and have already conceded 24 goals, with less than half of the season gone. Sampaoli seemingly did not share Lopetegui's belief that Isco would eventually come good, and the 5-time Champions League winner's contract was terminated 4 days before Christmas. It was a defeat last season to their great rivals Betis in the round of 16 of the Copa del Rey, in some senses, which seemed to knock the wind out of Sevilla's sails. Betis went on to win the Copa del Rey last season, ending their season on a high and with a trophy, contrasted with Sevilla, who were trophyless, and were left wondering what might have been. Those contrasting emotions have been even more extreme this season, as Sevilla languish down in a relegation battle, meanwhile Betis fly high, currently in the Champions League places. All of that has added to the general malaise that can be felt around the Estadio Ramon Sánchez Pizjuan on a match day, and the feeling that questions now must be asked of those who have been heralded for so long as some of the best operators in the game. President Castro has come under fire. Not Fidel, he's dead, and I apologise if this is how you found out. And even Monchi, untouchable for so long at Sevilla, has attracted criticism for the first time. Jose Maria del Nido, who still sits on the Sevilla board, is now trying to mount a challenge to Castro and return as president. Remember him from earlier on? He was the one who loved a bit of far-right politics and had to resign as president in 2013 after he got banged up for 7.5 years as an accomplice in embezzlement and bribery charges. Well, he was released in April of 2017 after 4 years behind bars on good behaviour. Now he wants his old job back, and there's every chance that he might just get it. There is a sense in which Sevilla's decline can be viewed through the lens of the changing nature of European football. When a club that has qualified for the Champions League for the last 3 seasons and has won 6 Europa League titles since 2006 loses players to Premier League teams in relegation dogfights, and I am referring to Diego Carlos there, what hope have they really got? That explains a shift in continental supremacy perhaps, but not Sevilla's nosedive into a relegation scrap all of their own. Ultimately, when clubs are hyper-dependent on developing players, selling them for substantial fees and then replacing them, there is very little margin for error. Put simply, if you keep selling all of your best players, it is very difficult not to eventually become a worse team. Sevilla defied that rule for longer than most, and the magnitude of what they have achieved over the last 20 years ought to be viewed through that lens. But in recent years, particularly since 2017, mistakes have been made, and whilst not all of them were immediately obvious, this season they have really come to the fore. This Sevilla squad has been significantly weakened, not only having the heart of their defence ripped out of them in one fell swoop, but also having lost a lot of their offensive threat in the form of Lucas Ocampos, who went on loan to Ajax, and having failed to replace him. In 16 games so far this season, Sevilla have scored a miserable 16 goals. From an exciting, young, hungry team that seemed to be freshened up and revitalised every season for so long, Sevilla now have an ageing, bloated squad, lacking in quality in key areas. It also cannot be underestimated, when looking at all of these underlying issues, the extent to which football is a strange game where momentum really matters, and right now Sevilla have none of it. The mood at the club is dour and stale, and their performances reflect that fact. Sevilla's January business has already begun, with centre-back Loic Bardet arriving on loan from Rennes, having failed to play a single minute of football on loan at Nottingham Forest during the first half of the season, and we can expect plenty more to follow. Sampaoli has already spoken of his desire to sign a left-back, a left-sided centre-back, a central midfielder, and a centre-forward. Whilst he might not get all of his wishes, Monchi has a point to prove and for the first time, some critics to silence at Sevilla, and he'll be determined to get that business spot on. There is still some genuine talent within the Sevilla squad. Goalkeeper Bono and forward Youssouf Endaziri both played starring roles for Morocco at the World Cup. Gonzalo Montiel, Marcos Acuna, and Alejandro Gomez actually won it with Argentina, and the likes of Nemanja Gudel and Oliver Torres are all still players of real pedigree. It is for that reason that I would be surprised to see Sevilla actually get relegated this season, despite the mire that they currently find themselves in. But that is hardly an achievement for a team that started this season competing in the Champions League. That is it for today's video. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Apparently it's good in some way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section, and feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens. You can also find me, personally, on either Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.